much of the past 2 years, campus free speech has been front and center in America, with a lot of the focus on the protests and punishments happening at private Ivy League universities. But public schools have been grappling with the issue as well, including the oldest public university in America, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where student activists are feeling the squeeze.
And there's a lot of fear. I know there's a lot of people who are not willing or able or just experience a lot more fear when participating in any sort of protest on campus, any sort of rally.
You can't have a great university if it's run by the shifting winds of politics.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home at the crossroads of the South. This week, we look at the right to protest at public universities and find out why everyone should be paying attention to what happens next.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
At colleges and universities across the country. Students at schools that include Columbia University in New York, Yale, and Harvard have been demonstrating in solidarity with Gaza. Many have formed encampments, and hundreds have been arrested.
In April of last year, groups of student protesters put up tents at colleges around the U.S.
One of the students' big demands at universities across the country was that their universities divest from companies that are based in Israel, but also from military contractors that are profiting off the war.
Gabby Del Valle is a policy reporter at The Verge and has been covering pro-Palestine protests on college campuses since they ramped up at the beginning of the war on Gaza. She's based in New York, so her reporting has mostly been focused on Columbia University and other private institutions in the Northeast.
Generally speaking, the dynamics were, to say the least, tense, in some cases actively adversarial. Even in the case of Columbia, a university that, touts its tradition and history as a kind of student activist university.
But Gabby said that what's unique about this moment is the way that students are being penalized for acts of protest like camping overnight on school grounds or posting on social media. Actions that in the past were largely recognized as expressions of free speech.
And the way that the university administrators and also the Trump administration are framing it is that it's actually not speech, it's actually discrimination, it's actually harassment.
She said this argument, that protests for Palestine are not constitutionally protected speech because they violate the Civil Rights Act, is the core justification that both universities and the Trump administration are making for their actions against student activists, all on the basis that the speech of pro-Palestinian protesters threatens and harasses Jewish students on campus.
It seems like there's this kind of one-sided focus on discrimination and harassment that is kind of being weaponized against these student protesters. And then their own speech is also being weaponized against them.
And Gabby points out that it sets a dangerous precedent for anyone who wants to raise their voice in support of any cause.
The Israel-Palestine issue is one that is so contentious and so polarizing that it's almost easy to go after those students first because there is like this massive opposition to their political project. The way that universities and the government are responding to these pro-Palestine students is a litmus test for how they respond to other types of speech, and it does not bode well. Who's to say that won't be expanded to an anti-ICE protest or an anti-Trump protest or an anti-tariff protest?
Or say, a protest in my home state of North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Brianna Atkinson, and I cover higher education for WUNC.
Brianna covered the fallout of last year's student protests here, which centered on a public square at the heart of UNC Chapel Hill called Polk Place.
Yeah, so it's Polk Place. It's super public. I've actually went to UNC as a student, and I've seen students gathered there. They'll have picnics when it's warm outside. Community members will come and give information from all different swaths and sides of issues, but it's completely open to the public, just like UNC Chapel Hill is. That's how their outdoor spaces work.
I just want to note that Brianna and I both work for WUNC, which is licensed by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. However, we are completely editorially independent.
The encampment started on April 26. Students and community members came on campus. They erected tents. There were people with posters, signs. They were chanting, essentially asking the university to divest from Israel. This encampment stretched out for multiple days.
But early in the morning on April 30th, UNC administrators warned students to clear the area or risk arrest.
And there were some protesters that remained in the space. About 30 people that day were detained. From what I've heard from students, it was a pretty aggressive situation with police trying to forcibly remove people from the area.
And while this effectively ended the protests, Brianna said that UNC's reaction to all of this has continued to play a unique role in the national conversation around campus free speech.
Even though the Ivy Leagues are kind of in the national headlines as far as targeting, the Trump administration has also singled out UNC Chapel Hill. They were on a list of campuses that they felt like had anti-Semitic activity. The Trump administration is equating that to pro-Palestinian protests on campus.
And that matters, because unlike Columbia or Harvard, UNC Chapel Hill is a public school that's part of a statewide university system. And the site of the protests, Polk Place, has famously been a forum for public protest in the past.
One thing that stands out to people is a public university is supposed to be for the people, and the people are supposed to be able to go on campus to spread their voice. That's historically what public universities have been used for. And now people are essentially being villainized as outsiders for a university that they pay taxes to.
In response, some of these folks are taking their universities to court. And the question at the heart of all these cases is the constitutional right to free speech.
It is unacceptable for government actors to remove individuals and groups who are engaged in nonviolent activity from a public forum because they disagree with their viewpoints.
This is Reem Soubey, a senior attorney at Muslim Advocates. Along with Emancipate NC and the ACLU of North Carolina, they've filed a suit against a mix of university administrators and police officers on behalf of a group of protesters. UNC Chancellor Lee Roberts is a lead defendant in the case. And unsurprisingly, Polk Place features prominently in the arguments.
There have been countless protests in the history of UNC Chapel Hill. At Polk Place, protests against the Vietnam War, the protests against the South African apartheid, and protests against Confederate statues. All of these protests did not face the same repressive actions that UNC Chapel Hill took against those who engaged in the encampment in support of Palestinian lives.
And when it comes to a public space on the campus of a public university, Reem said that those constitutional rights to free speech are particularly sacred.
So public universities are unique in that the right to free speech on public campuses stems from the United States Constitution, and in that the precedent that comes from those cases is one that applies to the entirety of space that we all have access to across the country, such as public sidewalks and streets. And so the implications are much wider. There's just something very unique about public entities and public spaces, because if we allow those rights to be curtailed, then we have allowed the rights of folks in the country to be curtailed everywhere that's public.
During the reporting of this story, I reached out to UNC for comment, but did not receive a response. But this is not the first time the university system has been embroiled in a controversial free speech case. Coming up after the break, we look back to a time when one type of speech was banned completely at North Carolina's public universities, and what it means for us today.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.
The thread here, I think that's important, is that the presidents of the university were able to keep political interference away from the campus.
If you want to know anything about the history of higher education in the South, Bill Link is your guy. The former UNC Greensboro and University of Florida professor is a wealth of knowledge. Right off the bat, he hit me with a stat that I wasn't expecting.
The problem of the state of North Carolina was, in the beginning of the 20th century, it was one of the poorest states in the Union, either the second or third highest illiteracy rate in the country.
Oh, wow.
And it was massively underdeveloped.
And this is really important, because Bill said it led to a grand bargain.
So, in a sense, the political leadership of North Carolina, which was very conservative all the way through the 20th century, made a deal with the university leadership that they would support the university, provided some degree of independence, in exchange for making the university an engine of social growth and economic development.
Now, this may sound simple now, but it was a new and kind of radical idea at the time. This unwritten agreement between lawmakers and the university system was often tenuous, and it needed champions, like UNC President Frank Graham, who oversaw the system in the 1930s.
Graham was a great believer in academic freedom and free speech. His notion was that any idea, if it was freely aired, would either stand or fall, and didn't need to interfere in that process.
But that doctrine was challenged pretty early on. In 1931, the legendary poet and social activist Langston Hughes was invited to speak at UNC about a controversial court case.
Just to begin with, having a black person speak on campus had never occurred before. Graham came under extraordinary political pressure to ban that. He did not. And he followed consistently a policy of making the university a sort of an island of free speech.
And that tension continued for decades, until the speaker ban crisis.
The speaker ban was a law that was passed by the legislature in 1963. It prohibited speech of any known communist, that's the word that was used, or anyone who had taken the Fifth Amendment before a congressional committee. It was rushed through. There was no opportunity for discussion. University officials weren't consulted.
Bill said the ban was a response to the wave of civil rights activism sparked by the Greensboro sit-ins in 1960. And by 1963, it had spread all across North Carolina.
That outraged legislators. This is a one-party state, so they're all Democratic Party. But they were absolutely outraged at this, and they believed that the protests were engineered by liberals at Chapel Hill.
The eventual effort to overturn that law was led by students, in what Bill said was really the first time students on UNC's campus had mobilized for a cause.
And in 1966, an organized movement arose to test the law and then challenge it in court. So at UNC, they deliberately invited two people.
Herbert Aptheker, who was a historian at the University of Massachusetts and an actual card-carrying communist, and Frank Wilkerson, who had appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee in the 1950s and had refused to testify, invoking the Fifth Amendment.
So they covered both ends of what the law said. Here, they did not engage in civil disobedience, so there's an important distinction to be made. They attempted to have the speakers speak on UNC campus. That was banned, and they then went to the front of the campus, the north side of campus on Franklin Street, and there Aptheker and Wilkerson spoke right on the wall. So it was very effective, and the students were actually the litigants in the case that eventually struck the law down.
Do you think there are long-term ramifications to the speaker ban?
It was a question really of a couple of things. One is, was a university going to be a place where you could have free ideas? And secondly, was the university going to be subjected to political interference? The fact that the law was struck down in 1968 was a major step in protecting the independence of the university in a very trying period. And I think that it was a victory in the sense of the Frank Graham vision of the university being a laboratory of ideas, where you could test out things and people could see one side and see the other and make up their own minds about things.
How do you think that's going now?
I don't think it's going so well. And that's not just UNC. To be honest, right now there's a general attack on higher education and the massive political intervention in higher education. So how much does the leadership of UNC protect against that? I would say not as effectively as it was done earlier, but they're facing different challenges.
The challenges might be different, but Bill Link said the stakes today are much the same.
You can't have a great university if it's run by political impulse or by the shifting winds of politics. You can't have a great university unless you have free inquiry. That's just a basic principle of academic freedom, but it's why academic freedom is important.
In 2025, the University of North Carolina has chosen to respond to the challenges of this moment with new restrictions on protests.
The UNC system, they actually instituted a protest policy across campuses as a result of the pro-Palestinian protests that took place.
My colleague Brianna Atkinson again.
The policy requires if people want to have a large gathering, they essentially have to check in with the school first. It has a caveat for spontaneous expression, but still it says that if people interfere with students trying to learn or a school's regular normal operations, then they're going to face getting arrested and getting detained on campus.
And recently, she saw the impact of this new policy at North Carolina Central University in Durham. WRAL was on the ground.
A 2-hour protest over housing crisscrossing NC Central's campus Wednesday afternoon ended with 5 arrests.
There were several people that were arrested when they were doing a demonstration about housing access. So it's already affecting people and campuses.
You see, NC Central students weren't protesting foreign wars or politics. They weren't appealing to the White House or demanding enormous change to culture or the world order. These students have a problem with something very specific and right in front of them: housing. And they want the university to do something about it.
There were massive protests, as we know, last year around this time. I haven't seen protests on that same scale. I'm not saying that the protest policy did lead to this happening, but there hasn't been as much protesting as there was last year before it was enacted.
You can find links to the work of reporters Gabby Del Valle and Brianna Atkinson in our show notes. And a special thanks goes out this week to Ellen Schrecker, the historian of McCarthyism, whose insight was invaluable for this story. The quote you heard at the top of the episode is from a student who was heavily involved in the protests at UNC last year, Laura Saavedra Forero. This episode of The Broadside was produced by me, Anissa Khalifa, and our editor, Jared Walker. The rest of our team includes producer Charlie Shelton Ormond and executive producer Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio and is part of the NPR network. If you have feedback or a story idea, you can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.